Listen closely. The night remembers her, even if Rome pretends it does not. In the narrow alleys where the stones still hold the heat of old torches. In the forums where ghosts gather after sundown. In the rustle of parchment and the hush of history, Fulvia's name returns. Not as a queen, not as a martyr, but as a storm. A woman carved from ambition and grievance, rising in a world that never meant to make space for her. A woman who swore she would never be silent, not even in death. And tonight, by the trembling glow of the fire, a scribe who once wrote her fury into the Senate's dark margins, am ready to whisper what Rome tried to bury. The story of the first woman who almost ruled the Republic. The story no senator dared to tell aloud. The story of Fulvia. You've heard fragments, I know, the crude gossip, the caricature drawn by bitter men, the convenient villain crafted after her bones were dust, power-hungry, wild, unwomanly, too loud for Rome. But the truth? She was the quietest one in the room. Until silence failed her, she was the only woman whose face appeared on Roman coins, the only woman who raised legions, the only woman who made consuls tremble and orators choke on their own speeches, the only woman who dared to rule Rome not from behind a curtain, but from the front lines of history itself. And yet, when the scrolls were written, when the victors sharpened their quills, when memory was carved into marble, they buried her under other men's stories. But stories have a way of clawing back from the dark. Fulvia's does not return politely. It returns like a blade pulled from the earth. She was born Fulvia Bambalio, but don't let the family name distract you. On paper they were noble, but nobles in Rome came in shades. Her father, Marcus Fulvius Bambalio, earned his nickname for a stutter, a trembling uncertainty. Her mother was clever, determined, unrecorded, as Roman women often were. But Fulvia, she was born listening to the shuffle of senatorial sandals across marble, listening to whispered oaths and broken promises, listening to the way power speaks, not with volume, but with confidence sharpened into a weapon. When other girls learned weaving, her hands moved across political maps. When other girls practiced their wedding smiles, she practiced negotiations with slaves and tutors and merchants who came to the house. When other girls dreamed of dowries, she dreamed of alliances. Rome did not allow women ambition, so she learned to wear hers like a hidden blade. And the first man who saw that fire, the first man who knew he could use it, was Publius Clodius Pulcher. Clodius was wildfire wrapped in human form, handsome, volatile, adored by the angry crowds. He was the kind of man who could turn the streets of Rome into a battlefield with a single speech. The kind of man who walked into the Senate as if he were already carving his legacy into the walls. And Fulvia? She did not fall in love with him. She aligned with him. Some unions are woven from romance. Theirs was forged from strategy. With Clodius, Fulvia learned the underbelly of Roman power, how to command the mob, how to twist outrage into influence, how to turn grief into weaponry. She stood behind him at rallies, veiled but present, studying the faces of men who loved him and men who feared him. She memorized the way the forum shook when Clodius shouted about the people's rights, how senators flinched at his name, how the Republic bent around him like metal over fire. But power makes enemies, and Clodius had many. When he was murdered, cut down on the Appian Way, in a burst of street violence that cracked the Republic's bones, Fulvia did not collapse. She rose. I was there the day she stood over Clodius' body, displayed on a bier in the forum, the crowds pressing so tight the air tasted of sweat and panic. Fulvia lifted her veil, lifted her husband's mutilated hand for all to see. Her scream did not sound like mourning. It sounded like a declaration of war. In that moment, she seized the fury of the Roman people. She pointed it like an arrow toward Milo, toward the Senate, toward every man who had ever underestimated her. She became the face of Clodius' vengeance, the voice of the streets, the embodiment of popular rage. Rome shook, Rome burned. Rome listened to Fulvia, and in the chaos that followed, she secured her next alignment not out of love, not out of vulnerability, but out of precision. She married Gaius Scribonius Curio, a sharper blade, a calmer fire, a man tied to Julius Caesar. She did not marry men, she married momentum, and Rome began to whisper that Fulvia's ambition was greater than any of theirs. They were right. Cicero hated Clodius, but Cicero feared Fulvia. He saw in her something he could not outspeak, a woman who could bleed for her cause and make the Republic applaud her for it. Behind closed doors he mocked her, mimicked her, called her a fury, a harpy, a tyrant's widow. But in public, he watched her, watched how she moved senators without ever entering the chamber, watched how the people followed her as if she were the last light in a corrupt age, watched how she, more than any general, any consul, understood the pulse of Rome, and he feared the day she would turn that pulse against him. He was right to fear it, because Fulvia did not just rise again, she rose higher. Curio died in the African campaigns, another husband lost to Rome's violence, and Fulvia, undeterred, aligned one final time with a man who would shake the world, Mark Antony. The Republic was collapsing, and Fulvia stood at the center of its breaking. Rome remembers legions, Rome remembers consuls, but rarely does it remember a woman who could march armies as if they were her children. Fulvia did. When Antony left for the east, the city trembled, not at the absence of a consul, but at the presence of Fulvia. She was no longer a widow or a shadow of her husband's. She was Rome's pulse, its anger, its unyielding voice. Her feud with Cicero became legend. They say she once pierced his tongue, a myth whispered in the Senate corridors, a story too cruel for a historian to confirm, but perfect for Rome's imagination. Cicero never publicly acknowledged it, but the fear in his speeches told the truth. Fulvia had found ways to wound men without lifting a sword, and when she raised the legions for the Parisine War, her presence at the campfires was enough to bend loyalty like iron. Her soldiers called her Mother of the Legion, not Antony, not Caesar, Fulvia. She moved through the night with strategy and intuition. She struck allies and enemies alike with whispers and directives. She became a specter of vengeance and authority all at once. The stories of her fury grew in the telling. Even Rome's enemies hesitated when her name was spoken. Power is intoxicating, and for Fulvia, it was a poison she drank gladly. The Parisine War was meant to cement her authority, to prove that she could stand against Octavian, to show that Antony's absence could not diminish her influence. She mobilized armies, set siege lines, commanded strategies. The city of Perusia burned as if the earth itself mourned or celebrated her audacity. It is hard to tell which. The air was thick with smoke, ash raining like judgment from the skies. Yet ambition and caution are rarely bedfellows. Rome retaliated with cunning and siegecraft that crushed the Parisine resistance. Supplies dwindled, soldiers starved. Morale broke like brittle wood. The blame fell squarely on her shoulders. Enemies within Antony's circle whispered she overstepped. She is dangerous. Antony himself, torn between loyalty and survival, did not intervene publicly. Her brilliance, once a shield, became a target. And in the shadows of defeat, the city that had once called her mother now whispered her name in fear and shame. Rome would not forget her, but Rome would not forgive her either. Fulvia fled. She crossed the seas to Greece, carrying her grief like armor and her rage like a sword she could no longer wield. The cities she passed knew her name, but only as legend, a cautionary whisper of what happens when a woman claims power in a man's world. She wrote letters. She summoned allies. She nursed the embers of vengeance. But Antony's attention turned elsewhere. Octavian advanced. The Republic's tides shifted, and her world narrowed into exile. And then, as if the gods themselves grew weary of her defiance, death came quietly. Not in battle, not in glory, but in sickness, solitude, and perhaps betrayal. Her passing was marked by silence. No triumphant procession, no Senate memorial. Only the faint echoes of her fury lingering in the Mediterranean wind. History tried to erase her. Antony, for political expedience, omitted her from memory. Octavian, consolidating power, made sure her name would not rise in the annals. Cicero and his allies wrote their histories in venom and avoidance. Yet even in erasure, she remained. Scholars of the streets, whisperers in forums long after her death, spoke of Fulvia as a caution and a marvel. She was the first woman to bend the Republic's momentum, to command armies to rival the greatest men in Rome's political theater. She had shown that grief could be weaponized, that loyalty could be earned, that fire, once lit, cannot be fully extinguished. Fulvia's story became a shadow for every ambitious woman who dared step beyond her expected bounds. A warning, a challenge, a spark. Picture this: the Forum at twilight. The statues of consuls and emperors glow in the dying sun. The marble is smooth, cold, and lifeless. And somewhere, beneath the veneer of stone and silence, Fulvia walks, veil slightly askew, eyes blazing with memory. She whispers in the ears of senators long gone. She teaches the crowds that power belongs not to the strong alone, but to those who dare claim it. She moves like wind through abandoned streets, shaking the foundations of a republic that never truly understood her. Rome does not remember her correctly, but those who truly listen, the ones who peer past history's veil, can hear her still. The storm she was is not gone. It waits. If you felt the weight of Fulvia's fury tonight, if you heard the pulse of Rome in her footsteps, then you cannot let her story be forgotten again. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want the shadows of history whispered straight to your screen. Share this story for every woman, every misremembered rebel, every forgotten storm deserves to be heard. And comment below, tell us which forgotten figure you want time and treachery to resurrect next. History waits for no one, but sometimes it listens.